My husband had just died when my daughter looked me in the eyes and coldly said, "You can't stay in the house anymore." Days later, a van came to take me to a nursing home. While she moved into my home and planned to sell everything my husband left behind. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. When my husband Richard died, I thought grief had already claimed the sharpest blade and cut me as deeply as it possibly could. For 50 years he had been my companion, my anchor in every storm, my reason for waking with purpose. His laughter once filled the house, echoing off the kitchen walls in the early morning when he made coffee, or rumbling through the living room in the evenings when he teased me for watching my favorite old dramas. Losing him left me with silence so heavy that I could hear my own heartbeat, as if it were mocking me for surviving when he did not. I believe I had endured the cruelest blow fate could deliver. I was wrong. In the weeks after the funeral, I tried to hold on to small routines. I still set his chair at the table. I still folded the newspaper the way he liked, though no one would read it anymore. At night, I caught myself reaching out to his side of the bed, only to find cold sheets that reminded me I was alone. My daughter Amanda visited a few times during those early days. At first, her presence was a balm, her familiar voice, her perfume that reminded me of when she was a teenager sneaking out with her friends, her way of calling me Mom like it carried a world of affection. But soon, I began to notice the absence of warmth behind her words. She seemed distracted, distant, as if my grief was an inconvenience rather than something we were meant to share. One evening, not long after Richard's burial, Amanda came to see me. I had cooked a small dinner, chicken pot pie, her favorite since childhood, hoping to recreate at least a fragment of the comfort we once shared as a family. She ate quietly, barely tasting it, her eyes fixed on the glowing screen of her phone more than on me. Finally, she put down her fork, folded her hands, and looked at me in a way that made the air grow heavier. "Mom," she began, her tone clipped and deliberate, "you can't stay in this house anymore." I stared at her, blinking, waiting for a smile, a laugh, some hint that she was joking. I even chuckled nervously, shaking my head. "What do you mean, Amanda? This is my home. Your father and I built our lives here." But her expression did not soften. If anything, it hardened. She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "It's not good for you to be alone in this big place. You need care. A nursing home would be better for you. You'll have people around, activities, proper supervision." The words sliced into me. A nursing home? As though I were already too fragile, too useless, too far gone to live with dignity. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. My throat was dry, my chest tight. "Better for me?" I finally managed to whisper. "Amanda, I can still cook, still walk, still live. I don't need strangers to take care of me." She sighed, as if I were a stubborn child refusing to see reason. "It's not safe, Mom. What if you fall? What if something happens? I can't be running over here all the time." Her words stung worse than any insult. I had never asked her to run over all the time. All I had wanted was a visit, a moment of her presence, a reminder that I still mattered to someone in this world. I looked into her eyes, searching for a trace of compassion, but all I found was calculation, as if she had already made her decision long before she sat down at my table. The silence between us was unbearable. I thought of Richard, how he used to hold Amanda's tiny hands in his big, rough ones, how proud he was when she graduated, how he bragged to anyone who would listen about her intelligence and ambition. If he could see us now, his beloved daughter discarding me like yesterday's newspaper, I knew his heart would break all over again. That night, I lay awake replaying her words. A nursing home. Not spoken with love, not out of genuine concern, but with a finality that left no room for argument. I tried to tell myself she was acting out of care, that perhaps she was overwhelmed by her own grief, that maybe she simply didn't know how to handle me in my vulnerable state. But deep down, I felt something colder at play, something that twisted my stomach into knots. She wanted me gone. A week later, the truth arrived at my doorstep in the form of a white van with tinted windows. The driver stepped out briskly, clipboard in hand, his smile polite but impersonal. "Mrs. Peterson, we're here to take you to your new residence." My knees buckled. My heart thudded painfully in my chest. Amanda stood by the gate, arms folded, eyes darting between me and the driver. She didn't move to hug me, didn't take my hand, didn't whisper reassurance. Instead, she gestured toward the van. "Come on, Mom. It'll be fine." The neighbors watched from behind curtains. I felt their eyes, their unspoken pity burning into my back. I wanted to scream, to run inside and lock the door, to cling to Richard's armchair and beg him to save me from this humiliation. But I had no strength. My world had already been hollowed out by loss, and now Amanda was chiseling away at the last piece of it. As the van door closed behind me, I pressed my forehead to the cool glass window and looked at the house one last time. The rose bushes Richard had planted bloomed bright red along the path, defiant against the coming winter. They looked alive, vibrant, while I was being driven away like a package returned to sender. That was the moment my heart shattered, not from Richard's death alone, but from the unbearable truth that my own daughter had chosen to abandon me. The nursing home smelled of bleach and despair, a sterile mix that clung to my clothes and seeped into my skin. The air was always too cold, humming with the faint buzz of fluorescent lights that flickered as though even they were weary of this place. I wasn't surrounded by family, laughter, or the warmth of home. I was surrounded by strangers whose faces told the same story. People abandoned, forgotten, left to wait up their days until time did what their children had already begun: erase them. My room had a bed pressed against one wall, a dresser with drawers that stuck when pulled, and a small window that overlooked the parking lot. From it, I could see the comings and goings of visitors, flowers carried inside, gifts clutched nervously, grandchildren skipping beside their parents. Each time I watched another resident greeted by family, my chest ached. I had a daughter, too. Amanda could have come. She should have come. Yet the chair in the corner of my room remained empty, the silence louder than any words she could have spoken. At night, I clutched the photo of Richard like a lifeline. His smile, broad and kind, was frozen in that picture, taken at our 40th anniversary when the world still made sense. I whispered to him in the dark, asking questions he could no longer answer. How could she do this to me, Richard? How could our Amanda, the child we raised, the girl you adored, cast me aside like a burden? The walls offered no reply, only the faint sounds of other residents groaning in their sleep, reminders that I was one of them now. The staff tried their best. They were polite, efficient, sometimes even kind. A nurse named Claire always asked about my day, as if she could will me into conversation, but her voice couldn't fill the hole Amanda left. Meals were served on plastic trays. Scrambled eggs that tasted like powder, watery soup, Jell-O in little cups. I ate because my body demanded it, not because I wanted to. The food reminded me of hospital stays, of sickness, of dependency. It stripped away the dignity I had spent a lifetime holding on to. I thought back to the years when Amanda was a child. I had worked 2 jobs after Richard was laid off, one at the diner down the street, another cleaning houses in the evenings. I did it so Amanda could have new clothes for school, so she could go on field trips without feeling different from the other kids. When she was accepted into college, I cried with pride, not exhaustion, even though I had emptied my savings to cover what scholarships didn't. Every sacrifice I made, I told myself, was worth it. She would have the life I never did. She would have opportunities, respect, and choices. And now, the very child I had bowled myself dry for had taken away my choices. She had reduced me to an old woman tucked away in a sterile room, someone else's responsibility. Hatred began to fester in me, growing in the silence she left behind. It wasn't the simple anger of a daughter too busy to visit her mother. It was deeper, more corrosive. It was hatred born of betrayal. Amanda hadn't just neglected me. She had abandoned me. And with each day she didn't walk through the doors of that nursing home, the hatred sharpened. The other residents tried to befriend me, but their faces were etched with the same hollow look of abandonment I saw in the mirror. Margaret, an 80-year-old who had once been a teacher, told me her son promised to visit every week, yet she hadn't seen him in months. Walter, a former mechanic, had a daughter who lived only 10 minutes away but never came. Their stories should have comforted me, proof that I wasn't alone in my pain, but instead they deepened my despair. We were a collection of castaways, each of us discarded by the people we loved most. I told myself Amanda must be busy. Maybe work kept her occupied. Maybe she was overwhelmed with responsibilities I didn't understand, but the excuses I tried to build crumbled quickly. A daughter who loves her mother finds time. A daughter who cares picks up the phone, even for 5 minutes. Weeks turned into a month, then longer. My room stayed quiet, my name absent from the visitor logs. The silence was the cruelest wound of all. Not the smell of bleach, not the tasteless meals, not the endless hours spent staring at walls that never changed, but Amanda's silence. It spoke louder than any insult could. It told me that I wasn't worth her time, that my life had become an inconvenience she wanted to sweep aside. Late at night, I lay awake, hatred coiling tighter around my heart. I thought of every sacrifice, every tear, every prayer I had whispered for Amanda's happiness. And now I wondered, had it all been wasted? Had I raised a daughter who could discard her own mother without a second thought? I pressed the photo of Richard against my chest and whispered again into the darkness, "If you were here, she wouldn't dare treat me this way. You would have stopped her." But he wasn't here, and I was left alone in a place that smelled of bleach and despair, abandoned by the very person who should have been my source of comfort. The seeds of hatred had been planted, and though I didn't know it yet, they would soon grow into something Amanda could never have expected. It was a Tuesday morning when I overheard them. 2 nurses stood just outside my door, their voices hushed but careless, as though the frail old woman inside was incapable of hearing or understanding. Their words floated in like poisoned arrows, each syllable sinking deep into me. "Did you hear? Amanda and her husband moved into the Peterson house. They already hosted 2 parties there. Neighbors said cars were lined up all down the street." My ears rang. I clutched the edge of my blanket, unsure if I'd heard correctly. My house. My Richard's house. The one we had built together, brick by brick, memory by memory. The second nurse chuckled. I also heard Amanda's planning to sell off Richard's workshop tools. Apparently, she doesn't see the point of keeping them. She said they're just taking up space. The words struck harder than any blow could. Richard's workshop had been his sanctuary. For decades, he spent evenings there, tinkering with wood, fixing clocks, repairing furniture for neighbors who couldn't afford new. His hands, strong, steady, stained with oil, had touched every tool in that room. It wasn't clutter. It was a monument to his life's work, his pride, his identity. And now Amanda, my own daughter, wanted to sell it off like junk at a yard sale. I sat frozen on the bed, my breath shallow, my pulse thundering in my ears. A wave of nausea swept through me, followed swiftly by something hotter, sharper, and far more dangerous than grief. Anger. Pure, unfiltered anger that seared through the fog of sorrow that had smothered me since Richard's death. Until that moment, I had accepted my fate like a prisoner resigned to her cell. I had convinced myself that Amanda was merely overwhelmed, too busy, too distracted to visit. I had swallowed the humiliation of being left here, whispering excuses for her absence in the quiet of my lonely nights. But this was not neglect. This was betrayal. Images flooded my mind. Amanda hosting parties in the living room Richard and I had furnished together, our family photographs still hanging on the walls, strangers drinking wine where my grandchildren once played board games. I pictured Mark lounging in Richard's recliner with a smug grin, as though he had earned the right to sit there. And Amanda, my Amanda, parading through the house, smiling at guests, calling it her home as though I had already been lowered into the ground. It was as if I had died, and she had written the obituary herself. My grief twisted into fury. My husband's memory was being erased, and with it, the very foundation of our family. Amanda wasn't just discarding old tools, she was discarding him. And by sending me here, she had discarded me as well. She treated us both as though we were ghosts, relics of a past she no longer cared to acknowledge. I stood and began pacing the narrow length of my room. Each step was unsteady, but my resolve was not. My hands trembled, but it wasn't weakness. It was rage. Rage at Amanda's audacity. Rage at the injustice of giving everything to a child only to be repaid with betrayal. Rage at the image of Richard's workshop being gutted, his hammers, saws, and chisels scattered into strangers' hands, stripped of the love that had bound them together. I pressed my palms to the cool surface of the dresser, forcing myself to breathe. For the first time in weeks, the tears that welled in my eyes weren't born of helplessness but of fire. I could almost hear Richard's voice, steady and firm, the way he used to sound when he faced setbacks. Don't let them take what's yours, Carol. Don't let them erase you. That morning changed me. The weight of despair that had pinned me down began to crack. In its place rose something fierce, something I thought I had lost with Richard, the will to fight. I realized I had been allowing Amanda's silence to break me, convincing myself that I was powerless. But hearing the truth about what she had done, what she was doing, snapped me out of that illusion. No longer was I the grieving widow curled up in bed, waiting for visits that never came. I was Carol Peterson. I had survived poverty, scraped through nights of exhaustion to raise Amanda, and stood by Richard through every hardship life had thrown our way. I was not finished. As the nurses walked away, their voices fading down the corridor, I sat on the edge of my bed, fists clenched so tightly my nails dug into my palms. The hatred that had been simmering inside me solidified into something sharper, resolve. If Amanda thought I would simply fade away, forgotten in this place that reeked of bleach and hopelessness, she was wrong. That day I made myself a promise. I would not let Amanda sell Richard's legacy. I would not let her steal the roof from over my head, and I would not let myself be erased, not while I still had breath in my lungs. For the first time since Richard's death, I felt alive again, not with joy, not with peace, but with anger. And anger, I realized, was exactly what I needed. The day I decided to reach out to Gerald, I felt a shift inside me. It wasn't dramatic, not like a storm crashing in. It was quieter, steadier, like the ground beneath my feet finally hardening after weeks of sinking sand. Gerald had been Richard's closest friend for decades. He was there the night Richard and I brought Amanda home from the hospital, pacing nervously in the waiting room with a bouquet of wilted carnations. He had eaten at our table more times than I could count, and when Richard passed, he was one of the only people who lingered after the funeral crowds dispersed. While Amanda disappeared into her own life, Gerald still called, still checked in, still reminded me I wasn't invisible. I sat on my narrow nursing home bed, clutching the phone like it weighed 100 pounds. My hand trembled as I dialed his number, not from weakness, but from the enormity of what I was about to admit, that I needed help, that I couldn't fight this battle alone. When his warm, gravelly voice answered, I felt something inside me unclench. "Carol," he said, his tone steady, "I've been waiting for your call." I hadn't even explained yet, but Gerald knew. He had always been perceptive, able to read Richard and me like open books. His loyalty wasn't loud or flashy, but it was constant, and in that moment I realized just how much I had taken it for granted over the years. I told him everything. The whispers I'd overheard, Amanda's betrayal, my fear of losing Richard's workshop, and the home we had built. My voice shook as I spoke, but my words were sharp, like glass breaking. He listened in silence, letting me spill every fragment of anger and despair. When I finished, he cleared his throat. "Carol, listen to me. You are not powerless. Richard wasn't a fool. He made sure you'd be taken care of. It's time to remember that." Those words struck me harder than the gossip I'd overheard days earlier. I wasn't powerless. I had only been convinced I was. With Gerald's guidance, I contacted a lawyer he trusted. The conversation was clinical, full of legal terms that twisted around my tongue, but beneath it all was a current of reassurance. The lawyer explained that Richard's will and estate documents placed everything, our house, our savings, the workshop, solely under my name. Not Amanda's, not Mark's, mine. My heart pounded as the truth sank in. Amanda may have believed she had stripped me of everything, but legally she had nothing. Each legal document I reviewed and signed felt like a reclamation. With every signature, I clawed back a piece of the dignity Amanda tried to bury in this nursing home. I wasn't simply an old woman tucked away, forgotten. I was the rightful owner of my home, the keeper of Richard's legacy, the woman who had sacrificed decades for her daughter's future, and still stood tall enough to defend her own. The act of signing my name carried more weight than I ever imagined. My handwriting, once taken for granted, became a weapon, a shield, a statement. Carol Peterson wasn't just a name anymore. It was proof that I still existed, that my voice still mattered. At night, I lay awake replaying every sacrifice Richard and I had made, the late nights counting pennies to pay the mortgage, the arguments soothed with laughter, the sweat Richard poured into that workshop. None of it had been for Amanda to strip away, as if it were hers to give or take. And the more I thought about it, the stronger I felt. Amanda had underestimated me. She had believed that grief and age had made me weak, pliable, easy to discard. But she had forgotten the years I spent fighting for her education, for our family's stability, for Richard's health when times were hard. I had always fought, and I wasn't about to stop now. There was a quiet joy in knowing she had miscalculated so completely. For all her confidence, all her cold certainty, she hadn't even checked the simplest of truths, that the home she claimed wasn't hers to touch. I looked around my nursing homeroom, the peeling paint, the thin sheets, the smell of disinfectant, and instead of despair, I felt a rising sense of defiance. This wasn't my ending. This was the ground from which I would rise. The walls around me no longer felt like a prison, but like a cocoon, holding me steady as I sharpened the resolve Amanda had tried to dull. Each conversation with Gerald reinforced my strength. He reminded me of the Carol I used to be. Fierce, resourceful, unwilling to bend when life pressed down too hard. And though my body ached and my hair had thinned, that woman still lived inside me. She had only been sleeping, lulled into silence by grief. Now she was awake. I didn't need to shout my strength to the world. It pulsed quietly inside me, steady and unshakable. Amanda had pushed me into the shadows, but from those shadows, I was preparing to step back into the light, not as a victim, but as someone who remembered who she was. That day, when I placed my final signature on the last legal paper, I whispered to myself, "You underestimated me, Amanda." And for the first time since Richard's passing, I smiled, not from happiness, but from the deep, unyielding satisfaction of knowing I was no longer broken. The knock on the door came without warning. It wasn't the gentle rap of a visitor uncertain of their welcome. It was sharp, impatient, commanding. My heart quickened as I pushed myself up from the chair. For weeks, silence had been my only company. But that day, Amanda stepped into my room, carrying the air of someone who thought she still held authority over me. Her entrance filled the space like a storm. She wore a fitted blazer, her hair tied back too tightly, her heels clicking against the linoleum floor as if she owned the ground beneath her. In her hand was a thick folder, its edges worn from use, its contents already rehearsed in her mind. She didn't bother with pleasantries, not even a false smile. "Mom, we need to take care of some paperwork." Her tone was rushed, clipped, all business. I studied her face carefully. The Amanda I once knew, the little girl who ran barefoot in the garden, who cried into my lap when the world hurt her, was gone. The woman standing before me had eyes sharp with calculation, lips pressed into a line of impatience. This wasn't love. This wasn't concern. This was greed draped in a daughter's skin. She laid the folder on the small table by the window and slid it toward me. "It's simple," she said, tapping the cover with a manicured nail. "Just sign these documents, and everything will be taken care of." I didn't reach for the folder. Instead, I watched her, letting the silence stretch, letting her discomfort rise. I could see it in the way her jaw tightened, the way her foot tapped faintly against the floor. She had expected a compliant old woman, not the mother who had rediscovered her strength. "What exactly am I signing, Amanda?" I asked, my voice calm but firm. Her eyes flickered. "Just some transfer papers. Nothing complicated. Mark and we can handle the sale of the house. You don't need to worry about any of it." The words landed like stones. The sale of the house. My house. Richard's house. The place where our marriage began, where Amanda took her first steps, where laughter and sorrow lived side by side for decades. I leaned back in my chair, folded my hands, and stared at her. For the first time, I didn't see my daughter. I saw a stranger who had walked into my life wearing Amanda's face. She pushed the folder closer. "Come on, Mom. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. You'll be more comfortable here. This is just a formality." I felt something shift in me, like a steel rod sliding into place where once there had only been frailty. Slowly, deliberately, I placed my hand on the folder. Her eyes lit up briefly, believing I would obey, that I would surrender what she had already convinced herself was hers. But instead of opening it, I lifted it from the table and held it firmly against my lap. My gaze never wavered. "Amanda," I said, my voice low, but carrying a weight that made her shoulders stiffen, "this house isn't yours to sell, and neither am I." The color drained from her face. Her lips parted, but no words came out. I had struck the core of her confidence, shattered the illusion she had built around herself. For the first time since Richard's funeral, I saw Amanda stripped of her mask. She tried to recover quickly, scoffing, shaking her head. "Mom, you don't understand how complicated these things are. You're not. You're not in a position to manage it anymore. I'm only trying to help." Help? The word left my lips like a blade. By moving into my home, By throwing parties in the living room your father and I built together. By selling off the tools he cherished, as though his life's work was nothing but clutter. Her composure faltered. I saw it in the tremor of her hand, the way her eyes darted to the window, searching for escape. For once, she wasn't the one in control. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. Amanda had walked in believing she would dictate the terms. Instead, she stood cornered by the truth, the walls of her empire of lies collapsing around her. I slid the folder back across the table, untouched. "You've underestimated me," I said softly, but the steel in my tone made her flinch. "You thought grief would make me weak, that age would make me blind. But I see you clearly now, Amanda, and I will not hand you the keys to what is mine." She opened her mouth again, perhaps to argue, perhaps to beg, but nothing came. The silence between us was louder than any words. For the first time, Amanda realized she was not speaking to a helpless old woman. She was standing before a mother who had reclaimed her strength, and she could not bend me to her will. Her empire of lies was crumbling, and she knew it. The day of the hearing dawned gray and cold, as though the weather itself understood the weight of what was about to happen. I sat in the courthouse hallway, hands folded tightly in my lap, the scent of polished wood and stale coffee filling the air. My heart beat steady, not frantic as I had feared, but firm, almost defiant. For weeks I had been treated like I was invisible. Today, I would be seen. Amanda arrived with Mark at her side. They looked polished, confident, as though walking into victory instead of judgment. Amanda wore a sleek navy dress, her chin held high, her eyes darting briefly toward me with a flicker of disdain. Mark's hand pressed against her back, guiding her like a prized possession. They whispered to each other, lips curling into faint smirks, as though I were nothing more than an obstacle to be brushed aside. But I felt no tremor of fear. Not anymore. The folder of documents Gerald and the lawyer had prepared sat on the bench beside me, its weight like armor. Each page inside carried Richard's voice, his foresight, his promise that I would not be left unprotected. My fingers brushed the edge of the folder, and I thought of his workshop, the smell of sawdust, the steady hum of his concentration, the calloused hands that had built not only furniture, but a life for us. I would not let Amanda erase that. When we were called inside, the room was quiet but charged. The judge, stern and deliberate, adjusted his glasses as he looked over the case. Amanda sat across from me, her posture impeccable, her face arranged into practiced sorrow. She played the role of the dutiful daughter forced into hard decisions, her voice smooth as honey when she spoke of caring for her aging mother and managing responsibilities. Mark nodded along, the picture of a supportive husband. But lies, no matter how polished, cannot outshine the truth. When my lawyer stood, he spoke with precision. Every sentence was a hammer striking stone. He presented the will Richard had written, the deeds and titles that bore only my name, the savings accounts with my signature etched into their creation. Page after page was laid bare, irrefutable, undeniable. Amanda's mask began to crack. Her eyes shifted nervously, her hands fidgeting with the hem of her dress. Mark's confident facade faltered, his jaw tightening with each word that dismantled their illusion. The judge's verdict came swiftly. The property, assets, and workshop belong solely to Mrs. Carol Peterson. Amanda and Mark Holden are ordered to vacate the residence immediately. They hold no legal claim. For a moment, silence swallowed the room. Amanda sat frozen, her lips slightly parted, as if the words had knocked the air from her lungs. Mark leaned forward, whispering urgently, but she didn't respond. Her shoulders sagged, her eyes glazed with the sudden weight of truth. I watched her, and something inside me burned, not sorrow, not pity, but righteous anger that had been waiting too long to be spoken aloud. Slowly, I rose to my feet. My cane pressed against the polished floor, the sound echoing through the chamber like a gavel of my own. I turned to face her fully, my voice steady, low, but sharp enough to cut through her silence. "You threw me away, Amanda." Her head jerked up, eyes wide, cheeks flushed. The courtroom stilled. "You sent me to rot in a nursing home while you moved into the house your father and I built with our hands," I continued. "You stood in those rooms, laughing, entertaining, as though I were already dead. And now you will understand what it means to lose everything you took for granted." Her eyes welled with tears, but I felt no softness. Not then. She had chosen greed over love, deceit over loyalty. My words weren't meant to comfort. They were meant to brand themselves into her memory, to remind her that actions have consequences, that betrayal carries a price. The bailiff's footsteps echoed as the proceedings closed. Amanda sat trembling, stripped of her arrogance, her false security crumbling into dust around her. Mark stared at the table, his hands clenched, the smugness gone from his face. They had thought they could erase me. Instead, they had erased themselves. As I stepped out into the hallway, the cold air brushing against my face, I felt something powerful surge through me. It wasn't joy. Joy was too light a word. It was vindication. Justice had not only been spoken, it had been delivered, swift and final. For the first time since Richard's passing, I no longer felt like a discarded widow or a burden cast aside. I felt like a woman who had reclaimed her name, her dignity, and her place in the world. The house, the savings, the workshop, all of it was mine, as Richard had intended. But more than that, my voice had been restored. Amanda had tried to silence me, to push me into the shadows. Yet here I stood, unbroken, unyielding, stronger than she ever imagined. Justice had been delivered, and I carried it like a crown upon my head. Weeks had passed since the court's decision, and the silence around me had begun to change. It no longer felt suffocating or imposed. It felt chosen. I walked through the rooms of my house again, tracing my hand over the familiar grooves in the banister, the worn edges of Richard's armchair, the faint scent of cedar still lingering in the workshop. For the first time in months, these walls felt alive again, not because Amanda had left, but because I had returned, not just physically, but in spirit. Each day I grew stronger, not in the way of muscle or bone, but in dignity. I was no longer the woman left trembling in a sterile nursing home bed, clutching at Richard's photograph as if it were my only lifeline. I was Carol Peterson, keeper of memories, survivor of betrayal, bearer of justice. The bitterness still simmered, yes, but it no longer consumed me. It had burned away the illusions, leaving something cleaner, sharper behind, the truth. And then one evening, when the sun bulled into the horizon and painted the walls of my kitchen gold, I heard another knock on the door. This time, it was not sharp or commanding. It was hesitant, fragile, as though the knuckles striking wood were afraid of the answer. My chest tightened. I knew before I opened it who stood on the other side. Amanda. But she was not the woman who had strode into my nursing home room weeks before, folder of lies in hand. She was smaller now, not in body, but in presence. Her eyes were swollen, her hair unkempt, her dress wrinkled as if she had not bothered to press it. When our gazes met, she broke. Tears flooded her face, spilling faster than her hands could wipe them away. And then, to my shock, she dropped to her knees right there on the porch, as if her legs could no longer hold the weight of her shame. "Mom," she whispered, her voice cracking, "I'm sorry. Please forgive me." For a moment, I stood frozen, my hand still clutching the doorframe. My heart ached as the memories collided, the cold daughter who had signed my abandonment, the little girl who once reached for my hand when she was scared of thunderstorms. Both of them were Amanda. Both lived inside the woman kneeling before me. I wanted to push her away, to remind her of the nights I cried myself to sleep in that nursing home, of the humiliation of being discarded, of Richard's memory desecrated by her greed. My anger still had claws, sharp and ready to tear. Yet, as I looked down at her, another voice rose within me, the voice of the mother who had rocked her to sleep, who had kissed scraped knees, who had worked 2 jobs so this very child could dream bigger than I ever could. Amanda's sobs shook her shoulders, and each one cracked my armor a little more. I sighed, heavy and long, not with weakness, but with the weight of a decision that only a mother could make. "I forgive you, Amanda," I said finally, my voice steady, though my eyes burned. Her head lifted, eyes wide with disbelief, searching my face for the truth. "But hear me well," I continued, my tone sharpening like steel beneath velvet. "Forgiveness does not erase what you did. You abandoned me when I needed you most. You tried to strip me of my dignity, my home, your father's memory. Those wounds do not vanish with an apology. But let this lesson shape the rest of your life. Let it remind you that love cannot be bought and trust cannot be stolen. It must be earned back, piece by piece." Amanda nodded, her tears still flowing, but there was something new in her expression, recognition. For once she saw me not as an obstacle, not as a burden, but as a mother who had endured and stood unbroken. When she left that night, the air felt lighter. The bitterness that had chained me for months loosened, replaced by something quieter, not joy, not sorrow, but peace. For the first time since Richard's passing, I no longer felt abandoned or erased. I had faced betrayal, humiliation, and grief, and I had risen. Justice had been restored, but more than that, I had chosen mercy, not because Amanda deserved it, but because I refused to let hatred be the final word. I stood in the workshop later, running my fingers over Richard's tools, and whispered into the stillness, "We did it, Richard. She knows now." The silence that followed was no longer heavy. It was calm, filled with the quiet strength of a woman who had fought back and won. I was no longer a discarded widow in a nursing home. I was Carol, a woman who remembered her worth, who reclaimed her life, and who, in the end, found peace.